Please welcome to the stage your host for the evening, Stuart Townsend.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I'm going to do the diligent thing first and take a picture of everybody. So put your best faces forward, please, because this is quite an amazing turnout and not something I was expecting at all. So I want to give you a warm welcome and say thank you for coming on this wet and rainy and horrible London day. And welcome to Big Data Week, the community meetup. So the whole idea behind the Big Data Week was a mad Sunday day trip. I was walking up a hill and I thought we need to bring all the communities together and get them into working, into networking, talking to each other and discussing things. So it was a bit of a mad idea. What I wasn't expecting was on a Tuesday evening in London, 222 people, 240 people in a room and coming to listen to an amazing panel having a debate. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming out. It's really appreciated, and I hope you have a great evening as well. One apology I've got to make is for the badges. Apologies for that the badges came in a horrible order, so I'm sure you've played a game, and I'm sure the statisticians between yourselves have worked out the numbers and some derivatives from that, so apologies. So hopefully you've got some badges. So what have we got today? One thing we have to do is obviously tweet out and use some nice social stuff. But one thing is if you can turn your phones on mute, so when the panel are presenting, we don't have some DJ music playing, some jungle, and everybody starts dancing and rocking away, because I'm not a great dancer anymore, I can tell you that now. So if we can just put our phones on mute, that'd be great. And if the fire alarms do go off, if we can vacate the building in a very safe and orderly manner, all very constrained and very polite and very English, that'd be appreciated, and convene at the front door, and then we can all have a chat and a drink about what happened. So one thing I just wanted to call out first is, as part of Big Data Week, it was really interesting over the weekend, we were approached by the US CTO, Todd Park, who's doing a live Q&A on Twitter at 7 o'clock this evening. So from 7 to 7:30, Todd Park's going to be doing his Ask Todd Q&A as part of Big Data Week. He's very focused around health and that aspect in the US, and is really open and welcome to questions from the audience, from the whole of the big data community, and really wants to engage and understand what are your questions around health, what can he do as a CTO, and what impact can that make, and what's your perspective from a UK position. So if you look at those details there, if you use the hashtag AskToddCTO, and ping them to his account, at Todd Park, then he'll receive those questions direct. From 7 to 7:30, he'll start to answer those questions directly on Twitter. Now, we can't guarantee he's going to answer all the questions, but he's going to engage as much as he possibly can, as quick as he can. So I think that's quite interesting that the US CTO has sort of recognised this space very quickly and wants to engage in there and directly be involved in the sort of whole community aspect as well, and position and get your thoughts and impact. So I'd be appreciated if you could take part in that. Obviously in the midst of the debate as well, and the panel, just to get things flowing. So what is Big Data Week all about? So Big Data Week is all about bringing 3 countries together, 50 meetups. In London alone this week there is 10 events. It's approximately about 1,500 attendees across those 10 events. And there, we started last night with big data and data science. We've got Big Data Week, the community meetup this evening. We've got Hadoop Day tomorrow, data visualization. There's machine learning tonight as well. There's a whole raft of community events that are happening throughout London and across the globe as well. And what that's doing is bringing together people from different practices, which I find really interesting, because the whole aspect for me is about bringing those different practices together and sharing knowledge and insights, so that as people we learn more, which is one thing. It benefits us in business, but also it benefits us personally. So, a data scientist working with a data visualizer, but also working with somebody from a commercial aspect to understand what is the impact of this insight, what does that action mean to a business, and what's the value in that as well. But also in the back end, there's some technology challenges that we have to come over. So how can we solve those technology challenges, and how can that drive forward? So I find it's really interesting that bringing those 4 elements together and across all these communities in 1 week, we should see some really amazing and interesting discussions going on. I've seen some of them already last night as well, the data science event. Hilary was speaking there last night. It was really interesting, telling us some snippets. And we had a panel at the end, and we ran over. We didn't leave till 10 o'clock. In fact, actually, we got chucked out in the end. And it wasn't due to drinking or eating or anything. It's about discussions. And for me, that's the driver for Big Data Week. It's about engagement and discussions and get us all interlinking together and sharing that knowledge. One thing I need to say is, at the end of this week is the Data Hackathon. So if you don't know about that, there's 7 or 8 cities taking part in that at the moment. There's 400 people taking part in that Data Hackathon. I'll send some more details out tomorrow. So if you're not registered for that already, get yourself registered. And we're looking at health data. So we're looking at air pollution and asthma data and looking for insights and correlations around that. And there's going to be some challenges set around that as well. So if you don't know about that, when I send a summary email out tomorrow and saying thank you for your all attending, I'll send some more details on that as well. So the idea is it's all about the community. So what are we doing this evening? Why are we all here? Well, obviously you're not here to listen to me or understand my fashion sense. We're here to see our panel. And we've got an amazing panel lined up this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to bring them together. And we've had we've had a lot of support to make it happen. But I think, cumulating that together, it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So we've got Ed Dumbill, Program Chair of Strata, co-founder of Strata, from O'Reilly, who's going to lead that and moderate that. Fortunately, we've got Doug Cutting over as well, front row Doug. He's been working all day already at an event, so I'm sure there's some questions from the audience as well. It's an engaging process, so we've got microphones out there. Please ask as many questions as possible. We've got Hilary Mason from Bitly as well. Hilary's been attending some events over the last couple of days. We've got Nick Halstead from DataSift, and we've got Andy Kirk from Visualising Data. So they're all respected individuals in their communities and thought leaders. So by bringing these people together, these individuals together, I think from a panel debate, big data ready or not, is going to be a question that we can all challenge. So I'm going to do the obligatory call out because things don't happen for free. Excuse me. So I want to say a big thank you to Oracle and DataSift. So 2 totally separate companies. One, a big massive corporate, one, a big massive startup. And without them, this wouldn't have happened. So if anybody knows me, they'll know my background. And if you don't know me, I'm not going to tell you about it, don't worry. But with Oracle coming on board, it's quite insightful. So I approached Oracle, thinking about in February time, because they were already supporting Hadoop user group, big data groups. They've got their own community action going on. And so they've got this madcap idea about this whole Big Data Week. I want to bring people together, and I'd love a community meetup, a couple of 100 people, a great panel, some drinks, all that sort of thing. That'd be fantastic. And actually, I said, yeah, that'd be great. In fact, let's just make it happen. Let's get it going now. And I'd like to say, actually, that was all my idea. But it wasn't. It was a lot of steering from them themselves, from David Rajan, who's in the room somewhere, who brought that idea and said, this will happen. We can make this happen. And he's very thought leadership from that side and drove it internally. And from DataSift side as well in terms of support. So basically, Google have this 10% thing. So I don't know, 10% on a Friday or whatever. DataSift gave me a policy of 100% thing and go and work on it because we think it's really great. And it's going to make a big difference. And that's the space we're in. So my workload has been very varied. And yes, I can say it's been more than 100%. So a big thank you to those guys as well. And we can recognise them later on all the panel as well. So the last thing before we actually get to the stars of the show is I'm trying to do a survey. So I'm trying to do a survey globally just around the big 5 questions on big data that I think. And it'd be really appreciated if you could take part in that survey and give some insights. And over the next month, I can give you some feedback on that in terms of what was the perspective from the UK, from the US, from Europe, from Australia. What did the different sort of geographic aspects make a difference on? And we'll produce that as a report and send that back. But I need you to spend, I think Andy worked it out at 3.4 minutes. I think it was. So I saw a tweet going out before. I think it's 3 minutes and 46 seconds of your life to give me some answers on those 5 questions. And obviously, the last thing I'm going to remind you of is follow Big Data Week while we're tweeting out, because I'm going to be pumping loads of information out through there. Excuse me. If you are tweeting out as well, use the hashtag Big Data Week, because we're going to collect all them together. And interestingly enough, I'm going to measure the sentiment in the room from start to finish. I'm going to work out exactly what people were thinking. I'm going to send that back out to you as well. I think you'll find that very interesting as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the panel, and you're going to be in the great hands of Ed and the rest of the guys, and I'll speak to you later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm just going to move this. It's only an accident waiting to happen. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for this chat. I flew in from California, as did Doug, on Monday morning, and we've been to several meetups as part of the Big Data Week already. And it's safe to say, I think we're thrilled at the reception and the energy and everything that's going on. So it's very strange, despite being a Brit. I've had my head in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, and I'm starting to miss home. So thank you so much for coming out and being a part of this. So I have my illustrious panel. To save you the effort of guessing who's whom, I'm just going to enumerate them from the end. This is Nick Halstead, DataSift, Doug Cutting, Cloudera, Hilary Mason, Bitlean, Andy Kirk, Visualizing Data, and I'm Ed Dumbill. So the way this will work is I'll obviously hand the panel some questions. It's their job to be interesting and controversial. We realize it's the end of the day and we want to entertain as well as inform you. We will be accepting questions from the floor. I believe there are two noble runners in the back with microphones. So maybe we'll ask a couple of questions to get things off, and if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. I'll say, "Oi, lady in the green," or whatever. And please identify yourself with your name and preferably your company, so we know you're not a shill for somebody or other. That'd be great. So before we kick off, I'd just like to gauge really who's in the audience and kind of your level with data, what you're doing with your seekers or practitioners. Undoubtedly, most of you probably know more than us. So, is anybody using big data seriously in production in their jobs? Raise your hand. Sounds right. Okay, could you raise your hand if you're looking at using big data? That's good. I can't really count, but
that was 34.
That was 34. Thank you. So what are the rest of you doing? I suppose is an interesting question.
Here for the booze?
Pardon?
Here for the booze.
They're here for the, well, aren't we all? So, is anybody here has heard of data science? We put your hand up as a term, as a profession. Well, that's good. Now, keep your hand up if you're actually doing if you're a self-identified data scientist. So just a few. What about if you want to hire or want to be one? Okay, I think we've roughly got everybody here. So some people are doing, some people are seeking, and some people probably haven't heard of data science as a job term, or necessarily. Oh, last thing, if you feel you could give a succinct definition of big data, like in maybe 30 seconds, could you raise your hand?
There's one.
There's one there. Okay, we've got a microphone, please. Do you mind if I call you on it? Because I think it'd be a great start.
So big data, what are you going to tell me? Like gigabytes, terabytes, or whatnot?
Okay, like a large amount.
Lots of zeros and ones.
Of data. Who else raised their hand? Could we have a microphone over here, please? Thank you.
Doing anything with data that you can't do with a relational database. Okay,
so very big and not square. That sounds excellent. So, Doug, what's big data?
Put me on the spot, huh? It's a buzzword describing a some recent developments in software and applications, generally involving large amounts of data. I'd say it's characterized by a more exploratory take on data than not having a preconceived notion about what the data is, and also by using data that wasn't necessarily used well before.
Right.
Making use of things which you might have been ignoring signals previously.
Hilary, do you have any expansion on that?
Mine is actually much more concise. I was going to say too big to fit in X, where X might be Excel, if that's the tool you use, or it might be RAM, or it might be SQL.
So there's this sense of being larger, something you can't do with your regular way of computing, something that you may not, data you might not look at in your regular line of work. Nick, is that the way that you see it?
I think it's more, because it is applied as a marketing term already, which kind of detracts, but I think of it as a combination of being able to take multiple data sets where they might fit in one machine or one chunk of memory, but they wouldn't be able to mine the data out of them where they were in different data sets. So I think about it, what value you can get out of understanding those data sets when you join them together. So because I think people think too much about, well, it's big data, and therefore, so that perception of it being lots of data is big data when it's not. Because a lot of times I get enraged by people saying, well, I have to use this kind of big data solution because I'm dealing with a few terabytes of data. Well, we've had solutions for years that could deal with terabytes of data. Why does that make any difference? So I think of it more that the constraint on most old-style databases was that you couldn't run analytics on them when you join lots of kind of data sets together, and that's what is achievable now.
Right, there's certainly an aspect in which, as usual, there's nothing new, but what we're seeing is something different, and now Doug is almost very personally responsible for bringing, sorry, there'll be a line of people to see at the end, for making this cheap, in a sense. And when you make something cheap that could have been done before, but can now be done with less effort, less investment up front, it changes the dynamic, right? You've almost got throwaway data processing at this stage.
To be clear, I didn't invent anything. I cloned some stuff that I read about in some papers as open source. I'm just a copycat, not an inventor. Was there a question in there?
I think you've answered it perfectly.
I also have to, as an anecdote, early on in the formation of Cloudera, someone approached us and told us that big data was a copyrighted or trademarked term.
No.
And we weren't allowed to use it. And so I spent a good couple of years avoiding using it.
Wow.
And now if we can complain a little bit about it being a buzzword, but it's actually nicer to use it than not to use it, to have a name for it. There is something.
Right.
Having spent 2 years not using that term, I'm glad to be able to use it now.
Yes. I mean, there's certainly this sense that...
I don't know what happened to that trademark, by the way. It may still be in, in trouble now.
There's somebody either very angry somewhere,
Yeah.
or rubbing their hands and waiting for 2 years' time, when everybody has a product with it in. It's unfortunate, really. But there's this sense, right, in which there are treasures lying in data that we may not have found before. And Hilary, I wonder if you could tell us a few things about, in Bitly, you're obviously a URL shortener, and therefore all of humanity at its most finest and desperate moments have used your services. What have you found that's unusual, and what wouldn't we expect to have found?
So you'll have to stop me when I talk too much. So Bitly sees a very good slice of the active social internet, and we've learned all sorts of crazy things like everybody loves Kim Kardashian. We know you click on it, so don't lie. 3% of the clicks in the entire year of 2011 went to web pages that contain the name of one of the top 100 celebrities internationally. And there are more dog photos on the internet than cat photos, which I really found to be kind of astounding. But what's actually really interesting about the Bitly data is not these are all things we counted out of the data set. But it's much more interesting to look at things in context. So we're starting to see how stories emerge and how different ideas come out and interact with the cloud of ideas at any given time. So we were watching, for instance, the Trayvon Martin case in the United States started as a very little local Florida state with very geographically dense interest. And we saw it spread to the coast of the United States, spread to the whole country, and then spread to the whole world. And we were able to watch that happen.
So it's this, what you really do is really, you're a great example of that operational data. And this is probably what Doug was also referring to, seemingly like, web logs or the byproduct of a service actually generating meaningful stuff. So, Andy, I'm going to introduce you now. I mean, in a way, you can't draw a picture of data that's big, right? And your thing is visualization. As this has kind of come on, big data has come on the scene, how do you feel about it from your point of view?
I think the interesting thing for me is that it's come along at a time when visualization as a concept in the mainstream has just landed, and it's almost like we've just kind of got to grips with the idea of visualization, and all of a sudden we've got to face up to big data as well as the design techniques, as the exploratory mindsets that we've identified with visualization. I think the thing from my perspective about challenging big data is that the obstacles to creating effective visualizations are the same if you've got 1 million data points as they are if you've got 1,000. It's about the rationale behind the stories, the questions, the topics, the curiosities that you've got. And we're all faced with similar kind of resolutions in the output side. So to me, it's still the same challenges for a visualization designer, whether you've got huge amounts of data or small amounts. And I think the other characteristics that haven't perhaps been mentioned so far are the elements of, and I think it's how yourself or Alistair wrote about it in the past, the 3 V's. It's also the variety of data and the velocity of it, and the judgment call about how quickly do we try and keep on top on the visualization side when there's the new raw material going at the other end is also the new task facing visualization, certainly.
That's great points. That there's something new and big, but there's something timeless as well. And while I think we'll dare to try and puncture big data before we big it back up again. Does it have to be big to be useful? Is all this hype that's going on really about big? Or is there something bigger than big going on? Nick, you were shaking your head.
I already said it, that I don't think it is the volume of data. There are already systems out there. I think it's about the changes in the richness of data, availability of data as well now. Is if anyone of you know programmable web, they've been tracking the number of APIs available out there have just exploded. So I think it's the fact that there is companies now, especially startups, one of the first things they always think of is producing an API. So I think that's changed things. So everyone gets super excited about the volumes of data, but it's not as though if you look at some of the companies in the financial market, in like DNS servers, the .com DNS servers deal with 10 billion lookups or 10 billion pieces of data every 5 minutes. It's just vast. CERN deals every time they run that thing, it's terabytes of data. So it's not as though the systems were out there. I think what encompasses this is the tools, the availability because of the cost, and also the open source nature of these number of tools that are out there that have suddenly made that there's ease of access into using these systems. Well, ease of access if you've got a whole load of data scientists.
Which we'll come on to, yes.
I'll be the contrarian if you want one. You said we weren't supposed to agree.
Absolutely.
And everybody seems to be agreeing that it doesn't have to be big.
You'll be thrown off
I'm going to say
stage for
it has to be big. People have been hacking on data sets and exploring them for a long time. I certainly have used Linux command line tools for years. John Tukey was hacking data sets with pencil and paper in the 50s and 60s. And computers later. The notion of exploring data sets isn't new, and exploring them with computers. I think what's really grown is the ability to process effectively really big data sets. That's new. And the existence of really, really big data sets. So I think the size does matter. Sorry.
Hilary.
Well, I agree with that. But
I think my point was just that we've got a MySQL table with 9 billion rows in it, so that's big, but I agree, we can't do anything with it other than look up one row at a time. When you've got that volume of data in certain kinds of databases, you can do nothing with it. You know, it's almost useless data because of the way
I disagree with you. I spend most of my time working with databases, you know, on that order, and I spend most of my time taking that big data and trying to make it small enough that I can actually do something interesting with it. And so it's sort of in between these things, in that the problems I'm working on are only interesting because of that volume. But most of the work is not in like, wow, it's so big. It's in, you know, how do I find the important bits to solve the thing I actually want to solve?
I think the key thing for me is that it amplifies the pressures that exist in any analysis routine. So on the train down today, I was watching the movie Senna and getting quite emotional as I went down past Newark and things. And I noticed that the challenge that he was facing in his World Championship drives were different to those on his initial karting days because the pressure points that existed. So the amplification of any mistake was so great in those kind of in the World Championship races. And it's the same with big data. If you've got a 10 million data set, the pressures on the servers, the pressures on the speed of processing, the pressures on the speed at which you can identify an interesting angle the curiosity, the hypothesis to dive into, the timescales that you've got to work with. It kind of just amplifies the need for efficiency, the need for effectiveness of all your technology, but also the kind of human factors, the design factors, the design interest, and the presentation at the end of it. And I think that's the key characteristic for me.
Well, there's certainly a lot that changes. Hilary was saying earlier, when you migrated data center, some poor sysadmin had to sit there and watch a file take 6 weeks to copy over, and that kind of stuff is part of the course. That's a lot of files, yes. But is there a sense in which actually your analogy is also upside down? I'm going to disagree with you. I'm the moderator. This is terrible. But you know, historically, statisticians have had to sample, right? And what big data removes is the need for sampling. And in a sense, you know, the pressure points are worse on the infrastructure, but on them, there's this kind of liberty they've not had before.
True. But I also think that also introduces a need for discipline. Because I guess whilst the idea of a population rather than a sample is great in terms of the richness, that also brings new challenges such as false positives, about data that's reinforced and duplicated. So I think there's still a discipline that's required in terms of the mindset about how you approach that. And it's those issues that I'm thinking in terms of amplification. But yeah, I mean, the opportunities far outweigh the challenges.
I actually think that the real innovation here is that we can ask questions and get the answers back before we've forgotten why we asked the question in the first place. And so your use of the word mind is absolutely appropriate. I think it's a human innovation, not so much a technical one.
Right. Well, that brings us on before I open up questions to talk about data science a little, because at the same time as we've had a lot of big data going on, we've also, it's gone hand in hand, as Doug said, with this exploratory entrepreneurial attitude towards data, and the emergence of the data scientist as this caped superhero wielding math, stats, a sense of romance and story, and perhaps this sort of entrepreneurial edge to them all at the same time. And I wonder, I'm going to go back to you, Hilary, because that's your job title, if you could describe a little bit what defines a data scientist to you.
So people ask me this all the time, and so I've sort of converged on a definition that includes 3 things. So a data scientist is someone who understands math, and that means both statistics and linear algebra, and thinks about it in the way that physicists think about math. That is, there exists a system in this data that I want to understand, not the way pure mathematicians think about math, which is it's beautiful and it does not touch the real world. And the second piece is that a data scientist is someone who, if you hand them data in whatever format it's in, they can make it do something. So they have to be able to have that engineering infrastructure, hacking ability, where they're not dependent on someone else to actually get the work done. And the last piece is the human piece. That is, they have to have empathy and be able to ask the right questions. And that is the hardest thing to find in the same mind that you find those first 2 things.
Right, so this sounds quite the character. I mean, you know, and some people are saying, well, it's the new hot job title, and everybody needs to be one. And you know, Doug, your company was co-founded by someone Jeff Hammerbacher, who is sort of a prototypal data scientist in a way. Your company goes out to customers and installs big data systems and so on. Could you characterize how are they hiring data scientists to run your software?
I think they're trying to. I don't know if they're always able to. I think a lot of times you end up building data scientists. I think also you don't always find all the skills in one person, and you get people working together, which is not a bad thing. Teaming up and combining their skills. I certainly, in my career, I don't think of myself as a data scientist. I'm probably more hacker than anything else. And I've done things that I would call data science as collaborations with people, where we work closely and used our respective abilities.
But it would seem that science is useful, and I love Hilary's definition of someone who comes to it without this preset notion of the beautiful system which it must fit within, but instead is kind of spelunking for patterns and so on. I mean, Nick, you work a lot with social data and whatnot. Is there much kind of data science in social data and the work your customers?
Yes, there is. When you're talking about 330 million tweets a day, there's a million things you can do with it, and it does. I think Hilary's definition there is perfect in that we've seen people with math skills, statistics, but they might not have that spark of understanding, and without that, it's actually very difficult to decide how you're going to look into the data. It's one thing to understand the process and the maths, and it's another to actually come up with how you're going to dive into that massive data. So I'll give you a little example of one. This is from one of our operations guys, who's a fantastic programmer. He came up with this amazing idea to search for 4 terms. One was missing wife, missing husband, and the other was missing girlfriend and missing boyfriend. And it was absolutely fascinating, just those 4 things. So the missing girlfriend, missing boyfriend was 70% was the girlfriend missing the boyfriend, and then when they were married, it was the husband 70% missing wife. It actually flipped completely over, but that was just amazing creativity with very simple parameters to find the data to derive an amazing insight. And so I don't get too keyed up on, there's lots and lots of great programmers out there. What I care about is that kind of open-mindedness to look into the data to derive something like that.
This is kind of the theme, this whole sort of exploratory thing. Andy, certainly in the UK, do you hear data science much? Is it a thing yet? Should it be a thing?
It absolutely should be a thing. I don't think it's yet achieved that penetration that it has in the States by any means. I think there are people operating in that space, perhaps more what Doug mentioned in terms of a team or a group of people collaborating as a data science unit by anything else other than by name. I mean, certainly if we look at something like academia or the public sector, the idea of analytics and management information has been embedded for a good 10, 15 years now. So, and I've worked in those organisations in the past, and I know that those people do exist. But I think it's the terminology and the consciousness of those skills as a neat package of a data scientist is yet to actually reach that penetration.
So in a sense, when we have this massive data out there and these patterns to be found and astonishingly interesting, but I'm not quite sure how useful, things to be discovered, but that's the point, of course. We're looking for a certain type of person, and I think what we're teaching in schools and so on, do you think that universities and schools are turning out the right kind of people right now?
No.
In general? No.
Yeah, in the UK, the number of people taking maths A-levels and then maths degrees over the last 15 years has just almost disappeared. So there's a massive shortage. But I would add that I do think it's not quite a calling, but I think people have become fascinated in this area, and actually the background, if they have some kind of maths background, can get it. I'll just call out one of our data scientists who actually was an architect before, but actually loved this space so much he wanted to completely change role and actually get into this. So I think it's more about the person, just generally their insights, than just the core skills. You obviously do need to understand maths, but beyond that, most people can do it if they have a fascination into it.
I also think from an education point of view, our education subjects are too siloed and too fragmented from one another. Certainly I'm in the process of teaching data visualization, and one of the conversations I've had most with people is, where should that exist at a university level? Where should it sit at even a school level? Now, to my mind, something like a data visualization elective would be fantastic for any university undergraduate to undertake, regardless of whether in the social sciences or the hard sciences or STEM subjects, because everyone's dealing with and handling and trying to make sense of data. And I think at the moment we haven't got that maturity of kind of cross-subject fertilisation that we really need. And I don't know if that's the case in the States or not, but it feels to me that we've got all the individuals in their own little worlds that we need to kind of bring these together into kind of these superheroes that you mentioned.
I have a slightly different take on it. I think there's a lot of closeted or latent data scientists out there who don't have the opportunity to do data science. And that if you can democratize the tools and the data, give institutions general tools and general access, then people will have ideas and they'll want to test those ideas, and they'll come out of the woodwork. I think that's what we've seen in organizations once you can provide this. And what you have a lot of times in existing structures is you have very siloed structures within institutions where only very certain people have access to certain data sets, and only at limited times and for limited purposes. And when you can open that up, then you start to see things flourish. So I have a little more confidence that there are people out there who may not have taken the right courses, but just might have the right intuitions and think in the right ways, and care about the problems to become data scientists.
But should the people in the audience be trying to recruit data scientists? I think that's the key thing is it the job of people building products to have data scientists to automate finding insights, or what size company does need to have a data scientist? So I'd be interested to see what everyone thinks. Is it how big before you would either use a consultant as a data scientist, or should you have an in-house data scientist?
When do you put a data scientist on the org chart? Anyone willing to? Hilary, when did Bitly put a data scientist on their org chart?
Fairly quickly, but Bitly is a bizarre company that was an accident and should not be used as a model in any way. And also, I had worked as a software engineer, so in spite of the graduate education, they were willing to hire me onto the technical team. Right. But I have a question for the audience, actually. For the number of people who said you were data scientists, can you put your hand up again?
There were 4 guys down here.
Yeah. All right, how many of you were data scientists in your previous position? I think there are 0 hands up.
Right.
I
see a couple.
All right, have you been at your job less than a year? No, we can get into this later. That's cool. But I think we are starting to, I know everyone on my team actually has come out of academic disillusionment from various fields.
There is hope.
And so we are starting to see people with those abilities sort of find the calling.
So at the same time as we're saying the education's woeful, all the disillusioned academics are leaving the education system
It's not that the education is bad, but that too few people study mathematics, physics, computer science, engineering at all.
It's too fragmented.
Right.
And it's incredibly fragmented. And there is no, as a young person in those fields, the path ahead is dismal. The path ahead points into industries that are stagnating, like finance. Sorry.
It's a warm crowd tonight, I think you're saying. A few drinks in them, no problem.
And so I think it's largely, again, an educational problem. And so I co-founded a nonprofit in New York called Hack and Why, where the tagline is to save kids from the street, meaning Wall Street, by showing them opportunities to use their technical skills for creative pursuits and make a good living. So we provide fellowships and internships into the startup community in New York and into the data community.
Right. So is there a sense which we don't actually need to force this? You know, as we kind of do fun things with data and it's visible that people are doing fun things with data, then things will just follow and we maybe shouldn't be worrying quite so much.
Just getting more data out there and more fun things to do with it.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people I know are self-taught at lots of different trades. There's a lot of people who did do formal training and that's good, and I did a little bit, not that much, and I think when people are motivated, they can learn at any age, so I think that's the trick, is to get people motivated and get them in the right situations. So it'd be nice if the educational system did a better job of.
So we're hearing quite a nuanced view, really, of big data. Well, it's maybe not that big, and it's kind of shaped to be like this, but it's not what you've got. And data science, well, it's important, but everyone's one really, and we can put. I'm not intending to mock you, but it's not. What I'm saying is this is not simple, right?
Yeah.
With all respect to our sponsors and everybody who says data science or big data. The buzzwords are there for convenience, and this is actually a lot more nuanced. And the one thing, I think, writing off what I think it was Nick or Doug was saying, when you've got data, great, you've got data. Maybe you're lucky enough you've got an intelligent data scientist who can do something with it. But then you have 399 other people in your company who are used to doing things the way they always did it, and the way that it's been for the last 30 years since the founder set it up or whatnot. Has anyone got sort of stories, or just how does an organization that's not founded as sort of, as a data-centric startup kind of adapt to start to use data in this new and exploratory way that doesn't fit in nice boxes?
That's a difficult question.
This is the one they all come to hear. How do we use big data?
I think the problem is, it comes back to this whole role of the data scientist. If you went to a recruitment agent and says, I want to hire a data scientist, they go, a what? So there's a stumbling block there immediately. I think we're obviously very early into this space. Mm-hmm. That's the reality. And until more tools are integrated with these solutions, and that more people are data scientists or on the periphery of data science, that it can become more useful. But I think that's why I asked the question of, is it the role of people who are building products to take advantage of the likes of Hadoop to mine the data in an semi-automated way, or is it, does a company need to be 10,000 employees before they can have 2 data scientists and go off there and actually perform that research? So I think, generally, most of the companies will be fed solutions now over the next 5 years. As Oracle and others install solutions, it will come with business intelligence tools that have backends that are Hadoop-based, and others potentially that allow them to ask more complex questions of their data sets. I think the one thing we see in the market the most is, especially in social, is siloed data is bad. Is that if you have some dashboards that show you some charts, some pretty charts, which they always are, here's a volume of mentions of your brand. What use is that in this silo, in this product over here? It needs to be inside your rest of your data sets, your sales numbers, your marketing budgets, everything else. You need to bring them together to actually get the insight. Because what do most people in a business want? They don't, because we don't have enough data scientists, what people want is actions. They want to be able to see correlations, and they want to be told what they should do about the results of that data. So this correlated with this, therefore, if I'm going to improve my sales next month, I should change what I did. That's really what it comes down to.
And I think that's a key thing, because you mentioned about this, a company that's 30 years old, it's always done things the same way. The end product of all this is ultimately, regardless of all the complexities and the irrationalities of decision making, it's about making decisions and forming actions as a result of evidence, of insights as a result of all this. you can have all the technology and all the data scientists in the world, but unless the culture of that organisation is geared up towards a more open, embrace way of working with information, not basing things on gut instinct or 30 years of experience, it's always worked like this. It's that kind of attitude at the top end that permeates throughout the culture of the organisation that needs to change. I mean, I did some consultancy work recently for a large supermarket, and not the only objective, but one of the main objectives of the work I was doing was to try and make their charts, their visualizations more attractive, because they were in competition with other insight teams at board level, and they were all competing for about 4 minutes of attention from the board. And it wasn't therefore that their objective was to help them make better decisions, but it was about to grab attention and to look pretty. We need to have something that's much more deeper as an aim to get those board members actually informed better, rather than just be served up some eye candy.
That is a fabulous point, because, you know, the best one in the world, scientists are not in that kind of attitude, fabulous at finding things, but they believe they should be listened to because they've discovered something objective, which, as we know, actually plays a remarkably small role. And there's this notion of a data scientist or a data team as having to have somebody who can tell a story on it as well. I mean, do you see that as an important thing, as kind of narrative aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the almost the journalistic sense of this superhero that we talked about is such an important attribute. Having the nose for story, having the ways to convey in a very structured, story-told way the kind of key insights from the data. Because most things do lend themselves to a timeline, to a story, to almost characters and plot. So that's a key attribute, and it's almost in many ways the hardest thing to train and to instill in people, because it's quite a natural inherent quality that comes with storytelling that not everyone does, but those are such important skills to go that final yard to get the attention, but to also make something stick and have an impact.
Right, yes. When I was talking at lunch with Simon Rogers, who's the Guardian's data editor and whatnot. Of course, newspapers like the New York Times have really done a lot in kind of this, they call it data-driven journalism, but taking data and telling a story with it. And now he's getting random companies ringing up and asking, can he come and talk to them, because they need that internal reporting on their own thing. Hilary, you were nodding a lot before about the storytelling aspect.
I think that's incredibly important, both internally and externally. I mean, you can look at the impact that the OkCupid blog had, and that's not a big data set, but it's a really interesting one, right? And certainly we've done some stuff with Bitly data, which fortunately tends to be about kittens and celebrities, and so it's universally appealing. That's gotten a lot of fun attention, but also made it really easy to talk about what's behind it. But I think the point that was made about the storytelling piece, meaning taking some complex understanding of nuanced data and rendering it into a format, whether it's visual or written, such that anyone can understand it very quickly. I think that's a very hard skill to find or to learn. I've been trying to learn it for a few years now.
But the key aspect of the New York Times' success to me is that they've embraced data and graphics and information graphics and explanatory graphics, not just as an accompaniment to a journalistic piece, but as the very heart of a piece. And the editorial processes they have at the New York Times, the graphics guys are as much embedded in that discussion as the frontline journalists are. So it's so integrated and cohesive as a production line that's why they succeed compared to other sort of newspapers who are sticking a nice graphic at the end as almost as an afterthought, just to grab the attention of the viewer.
It's a change. It's not just a pretty thing. It's the heart. It's the heart
of it.
That's
right. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to start taking questions from the crowd. If you're very patient. There's a gentleman over there. Actually, I hope you are a gentleman. I can't see very well. Yes. If you could identify yourself and for whom you work, please.
Hi there. I'm Andy, and I work for a startup called Nodium. I think possibly one of the concepts that we're struggling with here is how far along the commoditization curve this stuff is, because the very term data scientist lends itself to the idea that this is a kind of a bespoke thing that can still be deployed as a fairly tactical weapon in corporate warfare. And indeed, even at the corporate level and the startup level, there's a lot of startups in the US who have done the the commoditization of the web thing and realized how cheap web apps are, and that's starting to filter up. And I think some of the really new startups in the US are realizing that big data can be deployed in a tactical way in order to get a lot of market share. And certainly if you speak to some of the investors and VCs there, they're starting to understand this. Whereas over in the UK and in Europe, I think a lot of startups are getting funded based on traditional business models, and they look at big data as a long-term thing that you can do after you've built a lot of critical mass.
So big data's unfair advantage. Have you seen any of that? Google, perhaps? I mean,
Google was certainly founded around, I think, big data ideas. I mean, harkening back to your earlier question about changing companies, change is difficult in big organizations. And Google didn't have to change into a big data company; they were one from the start.
Right.
Even Yahoo, arguably, was one, and already had that spirit. They've changed their technologies some through the years. But it is a challenge. But I think one thing is just the alternatives are to become less relevant all around. And so I think startups shouldn't succeed because they're doing big data. They should succeed because it's a useful approach and gives them a valuable advantage wherever they're located.
There is a lot of hype around any startup, certainly in the US right now, that has anything big data related. In fact, there's few too many companies that try and say they're big data that aren't, because obviously it adds to the mystique. No. I think for the commoditization in terms of raw processing already exists. I think there was some stats earlier about a large chunk of Amazon's 500,000 machines are actually running elastic MapReduce jobs, which is quite staggering. I didn't think that they'd already, it's been around for over a year and a half. And if any of you don't know, Amazon Elastic MapReduce is basically running MapReduce jobs where you just choose how many servers you want to run it on and go off and run it. So that's very commoditized in terms of processing, but I don't think it's commoditized in terms of understanding how you use it, and that won't happen for years.
Right. So let's talk a bit about some of this infrastructure, because I think it's important to acknowledge, and your question was great, because the fact is, this is early days. We are at the beginning of something where we've got a few layers down, but the goal is yet far off. But let's talk about a few of the situations where this stuff is really working, because perhaps we've got ourselves a little glum with the difficulty of hiring data scientists, but the fact is that there's a lot of opportunity going on in the cloud and stuff. So some people you've worked with and customers or whomever, you've got any stories about where big data's kind of succeeded, and what do you think are the ingredients for a successful implementation?
So, I know we have a lot of customers who are using it. Exactly how they're using it, they're often quite secretive about. So we've got credit card companies, for example, that we know are using it, and they keep getting bigger and bigger clusters, and we believe they're using it to do fraud detection. But exactly how they, what sort of inputs and outputs they're using for fraud detection, they're not going to say, obviously. Right. It's like web companies telling you how they detect spam. It's not in their interest to reveal too much about that. Similarly, banks looking at loanworthiness. How likely is someone to make or miss payments based on their financial and whatever other history you can get about them. Right. It's my understanding that they've come up with some very effective algorithms, and they can improve their ability to predict this about someone, and that's very valuable. And so these are big, not brand new institutions, credit card companies and banks, who are making good value from their existing data. I could go on, but I'll give some other people some opportunities. I'll stick with finance.
If anyone else doesn't, you can go back to the
dead one.
I think I would reiterate, certainly we deal with hedge funds, but again, the problem is that they are notoriously secretive. So we have historic access to a vast amount of data, and generally we have to create our own case studies, because although they're using it, as soon as they are educated on the abilities, they go completely quiet. They won't
Right.
tell you what they're trying to achieve. They just want to know what the tool does, how they get access, and then they want to go away and double check with you that no one else can tell what we're doing, can they? You know, so I think that's why it's not commoditized, because right now, you know, everyone is being very secretive about the benefits that can be gained from them, and that's just natural business. If you've got an edge over someone else because you are deriving some kind of insights, because you've invested all this money into using these platforms, you're not going to likely share it.
Right, I think your examples evince one characteristic of big data, which is it gives you a better magnifying glass, where the industries you mentioned previously would have sort of coarse measures for what they do, lump people into certain categories of creditworthiness or not. Big data enables them to take a look at each individual, or certainly take a much finer look, where, there's typically, catalog marketing firms historically been able to use 6 or 7 customer segments, and then they send out different catalogs for each. But now, of course, with print on demand and all kinds of things, they can almost target you as an individual with big data on one side and kind of cheap manufacture of their catalogs on the other, or even emails. That's, applying this magnifying glass seems to be one of these areas where big data works quite well right now, because you don't need to be as coarse. I was wondering as well about data science competitions, because this is another area where we're hearing a lot of success. For those who don't know, there's a company called Kaggle who basically outsource this kind of entrepreneurialism from organizations. So one of their biggest projects to start off with was something called the Heritage Health Prize, where an American health insurer wanted to, I've forgotten the exact motivation, but reduce how much it costs them to run their business, essentially, and identify trends for sort of disease based upon the sort of the medical sort of occurrences of when they were making a claim on their insurance.
It was actually identifying patients that were likely to be readmitted to the hospital after a single hospital visit.
And what they did was they gave this data to a company called Kaggle, who sort of anonymized it, hosted it, and then a lot of curious people with time and energy sort of competed to find these patterns and produce a solution that would help this problem. And this, we seem to have seen this repeatedly.
There was a similar one for Netflix.
Right, the Netflix prize. Yeah, so what do you think about these competitions? Are these interesting one-offs, or is this a viable way for businesses to kind of take advantage of big data and data science without building it inside?
My favourite thing about the Netflix solution was that the winner never got implemented because it was so complicated, and the actual computational requirements to actually implement. I don't know if the Netflix was just a recommendation engine, and they set a metric of what they wanted to achieve in terms of a match rate. Someone could beat the metric required to win. Was it $100,000?
Yeah.
Something like that. Was it $1 million? Yes. But it was so
10% algorithmic improvement.
Yes. The computational requirement was so large, they decided not to actually implement it.
I didn't think they stated it quite that way. I thought they said that they had other priorities, and that it wasn't necessary, in their engineering, and that there were other improvements that they thought were
I think
that were going to be more significant for users.
They'd already got to a certain level with the previous winner. Had got to a certain level.
I read it carefully, and I didn't think they explicitly called out the computational complexity or even necessarily the implementational complexity. It just was an engineering effort. It would take some. And they had other things, and they had to trade off, and they because they were then, I've forgotten what the other things were now, but they were then having all these other features that they'd rolled out, and they said they think these would make a bigger difference to users.
I think they certainly became a more attractive place to work as a consequence of doing it, based on. I think
I mean, the competitions I think are a neat thing. I think they're great. You get it out in public. And I don't know to what degree different competitions have required that you publish the techniques. I think it'd be great to have more that do that and operate on and get more public data collections. As I think we're seeing a lot is a lot of the great data science is going on in back rooms and is kept secret. and gives people proprietary advantage. Now, people are happy to work on open source software, so the software is no longer the proprietary advantage, but exactly how they're using it and deploying it is. And so the more that we can get some of that done in public, the more we can share in methods and advances. So the open government things are great for getting data sets that are relevant to everyone, and putting contests out around open government to try to improve things would be a great way to do it, and there'd be great incentive to have those be run transparently.
Yeah, I suppose the key is if it does actually improve something, or if it's just an opportunity for cheap labour to do a job that otherwise would cost. Go ahead, sorry.
So the issue here is that these things are fantastic. They get data out, they get people excited, but all of these competitions are run on the idea that you're minimizing some error metric, right? And then, I find that in my work, the number of questions I have where I really have to work hard to minimize an error metric is tiny, right? Most questions we ask, we know immediately that they're either impossible or fairly trivial, or we at least understand the techniques we need to implement to get a reasonable answer. So it's sort of like, these competitions are like that weird wrench you get from IKEA. Like when you need it, it is the best thing ever, but most of the time it's not actually going to be useful in your toolbox.
I like that, the IKEA problem.
We should call it that. I think Kaggle would be totally happy. I want to hark back to a sort of debate we had at the Strata conference a month or two ago about, so it seems in a way nonsensical. Right, you're a manufacturer of, laser widgets in a highly specialized environment, and you want to do such and such, and you publish your data, and along comes a guy who studies glaciers, as happened with one of the recent competitions, who knew nothing about the domain and produced the best solution. Is this typical? You think so?
Smart people are smart.
They do? So we don't really need to know about the kind of problem we're solving.
There are times when I think having that domain expertise is actually a liability, because you constrain the space in which you're allowed to be curious and have new ideas.
Curse of knowledge. Curse of existence, yeah.
When I was actually reading this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and it goes into, it's fantastic. If you haven't read it, you should.
Yeah, actually a lot of this kind of, you pull at the end of data, and what you end up really with is human decision-making process and how it's affected. I'm going to start asking if the crowd, and there's one right at the front here, please.
If you don't mind, this gentleman's had a question.
He has, let's do that. Sorry, it's very difficult to see with the light, so please do shout out that.
Hello everybody.
Who are you, please?
My name is Sam Ballet. I run an independent music TV channel with friends from Africa. I'm based in London. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I don't want to carry on too much, but by the way, I don't work for Google, okay? I'm wearing the t-shirt. But I'm very grateful for all the data that is being accessible at the moment. And my big question is that we started up our company on a micro level, where we thought bringing up talent from Africa to build up and access, resources that is available to everybody else globally. Now we've got big data. I have to go back and tell the youngsters to, work with Oracle, while Oracle is fighting with Google over who owns data. So my biggest question here is, how do we support these youngsters without confusing them with all these IP issues, intellectual property issues? And the other thing is, I appreciate the lady in the middle when she said that she looks after street kids in Wall Street. I look after street kids in Africa. So thank you so much for that. I think that's a challenge for everybody.
Thank you. So, anyone quickly, is this all about big boxes and everything? Or is it universally accessible?
I think the software is certainly universally accessible. The affordability of hardware does cut some people out, and having the data sets. We certainly hope these technologies aren't patent encumbered. That would be a bad thing. But that's one of these things that it's really hard to do anything about. And so far we haven't seen a lot of patent lawsuits in this space, and hopefully we'll stay clear of that. But you know, I at Apache, at the Apache Software Foundation, people are often concerned about having projects where there's a barrier to entry, where only people can work on the software who have access to extensive hardware resources. And we try to, you know, have donated resources to make it so that everyone can at least work on it. So I think that is a problem. You know, there are big public data sets. There aren't big public clusters that much. There's a few academic ones that folks can use, but
right. So there's
an issue.
That does actually bring up an important point. By the way, next question, if you could raise your hand so we can have a microphone brought to you while we're still talking. I'm going to take one from this side and I'll alternate. So if you could bring a mic to this gentleman here and one to here, please, as well. If you keep your hand up so the mic runners know where they're going. You there, thanks. So let's just quickly talk about data and programs, because the thing about big data is you can't pull it over the internet. And so is it important for data clusters probably to be where the data is, and that's another limiter, right?
Right, yes,
yeah.
no.
Cool. Well, Nick, you haven't had it.
Well, I think it's
30 seconds, okay.
It interests me because there is a lot of Hadoop in the cloud, Cassandra in the cloud, startups out there right now, and the one thing that interests me is how the hell are you going to get the data into your platform to do the processing? Because as I say, we've had the same experience. We've had to download data sets that's literally taken us 4 weeks to download them.
Right.
So once we're in our cluster, great, but how does that scale? Because the internet hasn't scaled to allow people to put literally petabytes of data into a solution. So I do wonder how usable those solutions are. Amazon gets away with it because they have all of their infrastructure together.
Right, so there's this sense that everything in one place makes everything a lot easier. Otherwise you end up with your job's going to take 4 weeks and 15 minutes to run.
Yes.
So, gentlemen here, please. Could you say who you are and such?
Hi, I'm Bhaskar. I'm aspiring data scientist. My question is, there are so many problems out there can be solved or approached better by analyzing the big data sets. For example, if the medical institutes or if the universities and pharmaceutical companies, if they can share the data, we can approach, we can find better medicines or find cures for many diseases. So the question for panel is facilitating data between, facilitating the data sharing between these sources who got the data. So main problems in the data sharing is it could be data protection act, or it could be security, or it could be format or motivation to share the data. So what is in your opinion we can do to come out these to answer these hurdles?
Okay. So the question is, how do we encourage corporations who may be scared of sharing their data to share it with each other because the good that can come out of joining data sets up?
Yeah, I mean you're right to pick up on certainly academia. Up until recently, I was in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at University of Leeds, and the isolation of each individual research project in terms of the data capture and the ethics, kind of governance that wraps around those individual pieces, creates such a solid wall that there's no incentive for people to share, because it's so difficult for them to even get a research project off the ground for themselves. And so to then find ways in which they can safely share this with others, and also trust them to use it in the same way that they were intended to use it, is so difficult. This is just reinforcing your question rather than answering it at the moment. But I think that there needs to be a shift perhaps from the research councils and the funding bodies about just giving them more incentive to open this data up to not just pharmaceuticals because they've got their own mindsets, but also maybe in the same way and shape or form that the Netflix and the other example about the healthcare data was. Let's get this up in a more democratised way and let people have a go and let people explore, because these are huge data sets that are typically sat on someone's C drive in a lab that's probably got all sorts of doors bolted, and then that person leaves to go to another research project, and it's just sat there and it just disappears, and the value is not being optimised or exploited fully. So I think the lead needs to come from the funding bodies and the governors of the university funding models.
Right, so that's kind of a stick and carrot approach at the same time. Anybody else?
There are some businesses that are trying to make data itself into a business. There's, what's Gil Elbaz's thing?
Factual.
Factual is one, and then there's the, I'm just terrible with names of companies.
We have InfoChimps.
InfoChimps, that's the other one.
Buzz data.
Right. Now these are not necessarily making it freely available, but they are making it available.
Right.
So there is that out there as well.
I have a hand up on this side, by the way, while
Wikipedia also announced recently, didn't they, that they're launching a version of Wikipedia that is just a pure data project where you can fill it with data, metadata, rather than text.
Right, so there's certainly the incentive there. Is anyone on this side with a question? No? Next one. Okay, I'm going to say the other thing is I think the open data in government is a great example because government are able to actually lead the way and show there's innovation without necessarily any dangers going on. It can improve things for people who are a little more sensitive. So, gentlemen here, thank you for your patience.
Hello. Yeah, this is kind of an eerie segue onto what I was going to ask. Hi, everybody. My name's Jeffrey McCaleb, and I'm an independent product architect based here in London, but previously I ran a big data and real-time startup based here and in Turkey. Actually, that follows on to the point what I was going to ask is that, do any of you sort of find it ironic that never before in history have we had better tools to sort of access and crunch and store big data, but the sort of open data sets that we want to actually go after are increasingly being hidden behind API paywalls, or in the case of government or taxpayer-funded data is being wrapped around copyright. Things like postcode data, rail times, a lot of the data that we fund as taxpayers is not freely accessible.
I don't know that it's gotten less accessible than it ever was. I think we've just become aware that it's not as accessible as we'd like it to be, which is, awareness is the first step to fixing it.
Yeah, there's certainly a sense that APIs maybe got very popular, but possibly weren't the best way of doing things, even with the best of intentions. Okay, gentlemen at the back there, excellent.
It's Andrew Clark from Logica. It's actually an answer to Nick's point about how we get data into the cloud. Amazon will take postal delivery of hard drives. Werner Vogel said, don't underestimate the bandwidth of UPS.
Well, I hardly applaud that. So, where are we? Let's take the question over here. Sorry to make you run around. People with a microphone next, and then one at the back. This side of the house is the curious side, I think.
Mark Grundland. I'm an independent software designer and data analyst, and what I wonder is what will we be able to do in 5 years with user-generated data and social data that we are not doing right now?
And of course, you don't need to give your great startup idea away. You can just talk in general terms. So, what can we do?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I think about similar questions quite a lot, and if we're somewhat at the risk of going into the somewhat crazy space because you're asking about what will we be able to do, not what can we understand now. I think we will be able to see sort of what humanity pays attention to and be able to construct our understanding of human knowledge based on that, rather than based on, say, what an arbitrary small group thinks should be on Wikipedia. And I do think we'll also have greater insight into data that's currently hidden from us. So for example, at Bitly we see probably tens of millions of images and videos per day pass through, and we just let them go. We don't really look at what's in those images. We can't say, there are 3 people and a pony in this picture and then use that. That data is totally obscured to us. And so I think we'll see a lot of movement towards taking things that we perhaps don't even think about as accessible and making them accessible. And then you asked specifically about social data in terms of building sort of new notions of groups, of community, and of identity out of that data, and hopefully all for good things.
And I think the result of the social media boom is just such a great insight into sentiment and mindsets and perceptions and opinions that were in the shadows, really. And I think that in the next few years we'll have such a better view of what people actually think and what opinions actually are in a real-time sense as well, rather than some lagged 2 to 3 months period. Because I mean, certainly something like Twitter, there is an instant huge well of opinion about any activity, any event, any reaction to an event that just takes place instantly, and that is such a huge well of opportunity to exploit and respond to. And I think the kind of sentiment analysis will really mature over those years.
So we'll know more and we'll know better. If you're going to build it, I put my wish, which is, I feel, don't you think the balance of computer and human is rather wrong right now, that they have us running around putting labels in our email and having to read each of them? And don't you think that maybe one thing, if you're going to do it, would be to, all this technology that's selling as adverts would actually do a lot of our email for us, would be great.
I think I'll just add one thing to that 5-year view is actually what's going to have the biggest impact of what is possible is actually privacy. Is actually because there are huge data sets out there, there is availability to understand who people are on social networks, and it's down to really our acceptance of whether we want to be tracked to that level, rather than is it possible.
Right. We've got time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to take one from this side. You've already got the microphone, and this one over here. Thank you very much.
Tim Marston, 10gen, the company behind MongoDB. The question I have for the panel, it sort of builds on the last question, is from a more sort of infrastructure perspective, how does the panel feel the use of relational databases and non-relational databases will evolve and change over the next 5 years?
I don't think the relational database is going to go away. It does a lot of things well, and it's been doing them for a long time, and there's a lot of tools that support it very well. I think what we're seeing is the growth of alternate mechanisms for processing data. I mean, I used to feel like the relational database was the only way that people process data in enterprises, and if it wasn't a relational, it didn't exist. And as a guy who'd worked on full text search for a long time, I knew that didn't really fit in the relational model, and all the work I was doing didn't, and it was sort of like, well, yeah, there's search guys off to the side. But I think now we're accepting that there are other things, and I think they're getting their day. But I think it's going to just be relational and some other things.
More very well. I'll take the question over here now, please.
Hi, I'm Michelle Gallen. I run a tech startup called Schmooze. And way back in the day when I used to work in BBC Northern Ireland, we had a Freedom of Information request when that all came in. And the first thing that people wanted to know about BBC Northern Ireland was how many Catholics work in BBC Northern Ireland, how many Protestants, post-conflict society question. What I want to know about is the dark side of big data, where you're looking at dictatorships, governments that are able to capture data, who are able to use the tools that we think are for beauty and kindness and figuring out nice things. What's the dark side of big data, and what's going to happen with that?
Nick, I'm going to talk to you because
the dark side.
Most people's dark thoughts run through your servers.
Yes. So I think there is inevitably going to be more regulation on public data sets. I think that's a reality. The fact is, all of us share way more private data with our credit card companies, our innermost secrets of our purchase history of my Lego purchases. And they are obviously very, very bound by what they can do in terms of aggregate data and targeting and the rest of it. And I think this whole idea, Facebook owns so much information about us right now, and I don't think the government hasn't caught up with the fact that there is huge amounts of data there, and it will happen that how we are allowed to analyze that data will change. I think there will be constraints on those kind of large public data sets.
So you think regulation's coming along? Any other opinions?
I think society's coming along as well. I think people are learning what sort of things they do are for posterity and public, and what things are private, and learning how to use these technologies appropriately. And hand in hand with that, I think regulation needs to evolve, and the two need to grow together. I think we've seen a lot of progress, frankly. I think people are a lot more aware now than they were just a couple of years ago about what Facebook knows about them and what the long-term implications of that might be.
I didn't say they'd get it right, I would add. Just so everyone, probably a lot of people do know, the EU cookie law kicks in tomorrow. That I can't remember which, I think it was The Guardian today, announced that it would have a £10 billion impact on the IT industry in Europe because of the restrictions on websites and being allowed to cookie. So that's a kind of piece of legislation that was completely and utterly wrong. Luckily, obviously, in the US, SOPA got stopped. But again, it's about putting the right legislation in place.
Right, so the whole thing, and I think probably the theme for the whole evening actually is engagement is key. That even as a data science in your job, you need to engage with everybody around you and everything. And us as professionals need to be engaging with government and with society as a whole.
I'm actually not satisfied at all that the answer to this question of how do we prevent evil is wait for the government to save us. I think that those of us who design data systems need to be mindful of those potential uses. And I'm not saying don't do it, and probably a few horrible things will happen before we learn what's right and what's wrong. But that's something we should think about.
Yes, we've had equally fearsome technologies thus far and mostly survived. I'm afraid this is going to have to bring it to an end now, but I want to thank all the panel for their gracious time and for your attention and engagement. Thank you.
You can stay there. It's okay, you don't have to run away. I mean, I'm going to take a picture now because I didn't take it before, so you have to all give me a smile and put your best face forward. So, I would say thank you very much for all your contributions and participation. Some great questions coming through Twitter. I couldn't keep up. I think my battery's burnt out. So it's really fantastic. And I do know what the answer is to big data ready or not. So I'm going to give that away today and we'll make it live. So the answer is 42. And we can tell by the people who are a little bit older in the room, they get that totally. So we need to say a very big thank you to the panel and make it a massive thank you because people have flown in from all over the place, there's jet lag going on, and it's been awesome. So can we have a big round of applause, please? This is where you keep clapping because there's some other people I have to thank. So behind all the scenes, I know it may have looked a bit organised and hopefully it did, there's a mass of people that have made this happen, that are running around with cameras and audios and mics, and there's some ladies that want to kill me because some of the badges and stuff. So can we just say a big thank you to all the organisers for pulling this together in the background and doing all that stuff. Lastly, big round of applause for DataSift and Oracle. We won't do the round of applause, but we'll do a virtual one for helping, well, without them, this wouldn't have happened. And the next part is that we've got some more events going on, so check out bigdataweek.com for the events that happen tomorrow. So Hadoop, data visualization, we've got London Data, we've got a big data panel debate going on Friday evening, and the data hackathon over the weekend. So there's a raft of things going on in the UK, stuff happening in the US as well, and then some things happening in Helsinki and Australia as well, some bizarre places that have come on board. So check all that out. So you're going to ask me what happens next. It's very simple. You go and all talk to each other and go and debate. And if you want to have a drink, unfortunately I can't pay for it because I'm from the north and I'm quite tight. But if you'd like to go to the hotel bar and chat there, we're all going to mingle and carry on for a little bit of a while. But we need to vacate so we can break down and get home for the evening because I think most of these guys started about 5 o'clock this morning. So I want to say a big thank you for attending this evening. It's really appreciated. It's really made my day. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm open to feedback. Negative feedback, positive feedback, what can we learn when we do this again? So thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.